Hi, Celia. We're going to take a look at your rhythm and repetition posting, as well as the Notan experiment. So here we are. This is the rhythm repetition. As we know, we are looking at three different types of um, repeating elements used to form types of rhythm: alternating, progressive, and undulating. Those aren't the only types of rhythms that we could be exploring, nor are they really isolated. What I mean is, usually you'll find a variety of different types of rhythms in a scene. It's really more about what you want to highlight or what you want to emphasize, which is based on your intention. This project, however, was really meant to introduce you to the principles, to the frameworks of using repetition in this way, and then identifying what it is that you're doing. In some ways, a lot of students have been doing these things already, and what we're doing is just identifying it or giving it a title or a name. The light on this is just beautiful, Celia. I mean, when we're talking about photography, we always connect it to light. We always talk about how light describes a time of day, it describes a place, it describes a feeling, and that is the medium of photography. So when you have something like this where you're dealing with a very low angle like this, it really comes across beautifully. And it just doesn't have to be at those sort of golden hour times. Here we have something that is much more about midday, but you're using it in a very graphic form. Here again with a progressive rhythm. Let's just make sure, yes, you're identifying it correctly. Now, in terms of the composition here, however, there are some elements that we could probably do without. This stuff up here, probably get a little bit higher if we were able to crop this out or remove it somehow optically. It would have been a much better situation, because you would have isolated this and it would have had us focus only on that rather than this business up here, which isn't contributing to the composition at all. Some of it may have been things you didn't see at all in your frame, and that really has to do with the camera itself as to whether it's showing you all of your picture frame. Again, you know, these are go-to strategies when you're looking to set up that progressive rhythm, particularly if you're in a location that is very busy. The progressive rhythm really kind of helps you to lead the eye through it. Also, if it isn't busy, if it's very open, you can add a dynamic to what otherwise might be a real dull scene and add movement to it in this way. Here we've kind of knelt down at a slightly different angle. I think this is just about as close as we ever want photos to be and still be in the same image or the same series. We really want to keep images separate. This is really getting close to the same image. I think the angles are far enough away, especially if we had done the sort of cropping here that we were talking about. I was mentioning earlier, isolating it a little bit more. But be real aware of, when you're choosing your images to post, that you're not doing the mistake, basically making the mistake of repeating images. This is again a really beautiful use of the leading line. You've been using leading line quite beautifully here, and this is no exception, except, you know, I don't know that we need this information down at the bottom. Once again, you may have seen less of it in your, you may have seen less of it in your image when you were framing it up, because of your viewfinder not giving you 100% of the of the view. Sometimes it just shows you maybe 90% of the actual view. But if this was cut right here, you wouldn't have any of this activity, any of this texture, any of the contrast, and the eye would just immediately drift right on back into this space, which is, I'm presuming, what you want us to look at. Now, this is an experiment in the progressive, or in creating these rhythms, this one being a progressive rhythm. Now, what you would employ this because there would be something back here for us to want to see. So, and really sometimes by moving yourself just a little bit, you can move this line to different places and point us in different directions. It's a pretty interesting tool to use. So let's see what we're doing with alternating rhythm. Alternating rhythm can sometimes get people a little bit flustered because it's much more graphic. We're flattening things out usually. I see you've done it pretty well right here. This is a good example of the alternating rhythm without letting it get too symmetrical. You've used the building to create that symmetry, but we don't want this person here. Actually, this is sounding really familiar. Have I? I'll keep going. So this image reminds me of somebody else's image for some reason. I'm not exactly sure why. Anyway, the symmetry of here without it being too symmetrical is really acting toward a benefit for you. The repetition here, where you're doing here, this is a alternating rhythm, creating a progressive rhythm, and then the leading lines. So all of these things are really helping to create these varieties here. This, let's see, we're identifying this as alternating rhythm. What would we be, is this something that we would call an alternating rhythm? I suppose I see where you're going with this, where you're kind of using this and this, and this and this, and then this in the middle here, back, forth, back, forth. I see what you're doing. You might have cropped it again. I think overall in these images, we need to step closer to what you're looking at. That way you'll have a much cleaner image, and you'll be able to highlight what you're actually looking at. I'm not sure to get the actual feeling of the rhythm that we needed any of this stuff or any of this stuff. You really wanted to just kind of give us this, because that's what the rhythm is that you want to show us. As far as this is more undulating rhythm. It's a beautiful kind of thing that's happening. The best way to describe undulating rhythm might be this. It's a pattern, or it's a repetition of things that are happening, usually somewhat organic kind of shape, but there is a real lack of a motif, or it's a very difficult motif to identify. So we have these repetitions of curves and this sort of movement here, even in this subtle change of tone, where it looks like this is sort of damp, and then this is sort of got the white, and then this has got the darker. You've got this undulating thing that's happening as a repetition. There really isn't a discernible motif that's repeating, though, over and over, except for this sort of nebulous shape. That's undulating, not, would be an undulating rhythm born out of maybe an alternating rhythm. Yeah, this is, I think you've identified this well. This is a progressive rhythm with an undulating rhythm happening at the same time. Let's take a peek at your notan here. Once again, what we have is very good examples here in terms of the use of shadows. You know, the benefit of the use of the shadows is to work on this multiple plane. You're suggesting the existence of elements that are not in the picture plane. So you're sort of layering things in a very unique way. You have sort of a platform, the actual surface that the cast shadow is hitting, and then you have the elements that are on the surface that the cast shadow is hitting. For instance, this is an apple, and then you have some texture here, and then you have the shadow itself that is being cast, which is being cast from objects that are outside of the frame. So you have this multiple layer thing going on, which adds complexity to what otherwise might be a very simple sort of scene. And you've constructed a still life here, a very beautiful and interesting still life. I really am interested in what you did here. This is a little less interesting because it's more one note. There's not really a whole lot of complexity. You're not taking advantage of the complexity that you could be where you're doing it here much more deliberately. These two are just remarkable in terms of what you're doing. This gets kind of interesting just in terms of the pattern that you're creating. These become a little less interesting, not uninteresting, but they become a little less interesting. But these are just remarkable and beautiful images here. I would really suggest that you continue looking at this as a way to continue moving forward. It also looks like we have on your black and white setting perhaps a filter that's pushing the contrast a little deeper than otherwise. It's not necessarily something wrong. It's just an observation there, because you can see how deep those shadows are, and how almost like silver-like the highlights are on there. Now, spaces in between, I did describe them in the overview. What we're really getting at there is going to be these spaces here. And the way to really accomplish that is to allow a lot of elements to break the surface. Here's a good example of that. I think almost everybody chose at least one image with a tree like this. It's a good way to approach it, just to explore the idea of working with shape that is not defined by an object. It's defined by the spaces in between objects, because a tree in the winter time and early spring before the leaves come on has all of these beautiful shapes that you can work with. Now, they become even more shape-based when you close them. A shape takes form when it closes. So if I do this, that's a closed shape of a triangle. If I do this, I'm sort of suggesting the triangle, and our eyes will pick up on it, but it's less of a shape until I do that. So something like, this, where this shape coming down and then coming over here, if these two elements were running off the picture plane, so if the image was cropped here and then cropped here, you would create this shape. You would also have within that these other shapes. You'd also would have created this shape, and then you would have had inside that these shapes. So it's really about looking at the overall picture plane and engaging those edges, and then looking at the consequent of every sort of line. The spaces in between really is an exercise in identifying the entire picture plane, the entire frame of your picture, and making sure that every piece of it is being utilized to its maximum. That's really what we're doing here. This is amazing. This is a beautifully kind of almost surreal dystopian feel to it. It could be taken even farther if we had a few of these elements on the swing set running off the edges, because then it would become shape-based and you have a much more of an impact to it. So that's what I have for you. Hopefully that was helpful. I know that we've done quite a bit of exploring on the technique side, and that these sort of started to drift us into more of the concept side. Still moving around in the how to use these things to apply them to form. And the next projects being more about using form to suggest content or suggest ideas and things like that. That's the direction we're going in. And I'm seeing evidence of that already within your photography. So I'm very much encouraged by what I see. So thank you so much, and we'll see you in the studio. Bye-bye now.